Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The flight that promised peace. The muted hum of airplane engines provided a calm backdrop as Dr. Elijah Carter stowed his luggage in the overhead bin of the first-class cabin. His wife, Dr. Sophia Carter, stood beside him, double-checking their seats and scanning the area with a practiced eye. This trip to Zurich was one they had planned for months, a rare opportunity to blend professional growth with some much-needed personal time. Elijah, a tall, athletic man in his early 40s, with a closely trimmed beard, adjusted his blazer before glancing over at Sophia. Her curly hair was swept up into a bun, and her warm brown eyes sparkled with the excitement she always felt before stepping into any international medical conference. Elijah admired her, not just for her beauty, but for her indomitable spirit. They had been through so much together: medical school, grueling residencies, and countless life-or-death surgeries. "Do you want the aisle seat, Soph?" Elijah asked, though he already knew the answer. Sophia grinned, sliding into her favorite spot by the window. "Not a chance. I want to watch the clouds this time." Elijah laughed softly and took the seat beside her. Despite years of traveling to various conferences and seminars, the view never lost its charm for Sophia. Elijah, meanwhile, had already pulled out his tablet, eager to review his notes for a panel discussion he would co-chair in Zurich. The topic was his pioneering work in robotic-assisted surgeries, something that had earned him global recognition in the medical community. Sophia, on the other hand, was the keynote speaker for the conference. Her groundbreaking research into regenerative heart valve therapies had been making waves in cardiology. But to her, the accolades were secondary. Her real joy came from the potential to save lives. As they settled in, a flight attendant named Clara approached with the pre-flight drink menu. Her demeanor was professional, her smile polite but distant. Elijah asked for sparkling water while Sophia opted for tea. The other first-class passengers began filing in, a mix of business travelers, vacationing couples, and the occasional solo adventurer. Elijah noticed a middle-aged couple with two young children struggling to settle into their seats a few rows ahead. The kids seemed restless, and the parents looked frazzled. It was a scene he'd seen countless times as a parent himself, though his own children were now teenagers. "Do you think we'll get through this flight without any drama?" Sophia teased, noticing his distracted gaze. "I sure hope so," Elijah replied. "I could use a few hours of peace before the conference chaos begins." Sophia reached for his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about the bond they shared. A partnership forged in the fire of sleepless nights, hospital crises, and the relentless demands of their careers. Just as they were settling in, a subtle commotion in the aisle caught their attention. A family of 4, the same one Elijah had noticed earlier, was speaking in hushed tones with a flight attendant. The mother gestured toward the first-class cabin, her expression one of mild frustration. The flight attendant, Clara, nodded and walked toward the front of the plane. Elijah didn't think much of it until Clara reappeared moments later, accompanied by another flight attendant who seemed to be of higher rank. Their purposeful strides and exchanged glances signaled that something was amiss. The request that changed the atmosphere. The taller flight attendant, whose name tag read Mr. Daniels, approached Elijah and Sophia's row with an air of polite hesitation. "Good evening, Doctor and Dr. Carter," he began, his tone smooth but carrying an undercurrent of unease. "I hope you're both comfortable." Elijah set his tablet aside, his instincts telling him this wasn't just a courtesy check. "We're fine, thank you. Is there an issue?" Daniels cleared his throat, glancing briefly at Clara before continuing. "We have a bit of an overbooking situation today. A family of 4 in the economy section was promised an upgrade to first class, but unfortunately, there aren't enough available seats. We're wondering if you'd be willing to switch to economy. Of course, we'd compensate you for the inconvenience with vouchers or flight credits." For a moment, there was silence. Elijah's expression remained neutral, but Sophia's brow furrowed ever so slightly. She leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. We booked these seats weeks ago, specifically so we could work during the flight. I have a keynote presentation in Zurich, and my husband is leading a panel. Is there a reason we're being asked to move? Daniels hesitated. Clara stepped in, her voice quieter but no less insistent. We thought perhaps you might find it easier to prepare in a less crowded section. Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. Less crowded? Economy is fully booked, isn't it? That hardly sounds easier. Elijah held up a hand, his tone measured. We appreciate the need to accommodate all passengers, but we've planned this trip carefully. These seats were chosen for a reason. I'm afraid we can't oblige. The exchange had drawn the attention of nearby passengers. The businessman across the aisle looked up from his laptop, and a couple of few rows ahead exchanged whispers. The subtle underlying tensions. Daniel seemed momentarily at a loss, but then his expression shifted to something more conciliatory. I understand. It's just that the family has small children, and the extra space in first class would make their journey more comfortable. And our comfort? Sophia asked, her voice still calm but with a sharper edge. Does it matter less, because we don't have children with us? Or is there another reason? Her question hung in the air, its implications clear. Elijah felt the weight of it settle in his chest. They had faced these moments before, at restaurants, hotels, even in professional settings. The unspoken assumption that they didn't quite belong, that their presence was somehow negotiable. Daniel's composure faltered for a split second before he recovered. Not at all, ma'am. We're simply trying to resolve a difficult situation. Sophia opened her tablet, pulling up her itinerary and email confirmation. This is our booking. Paid in full. We planned this trip meticulously because we value our work and the impact it has on lives. I'm not sure why we're being asked to give that up. The firmness in her voice silenced Daniels momentarily. Clara stepped back, glancing nervously toward the family still waiting in the aisle. A quiet but firm stand. Elijah straightened in his seat, meeting Daniels' gaze head-on. Mr. Daniels, let me make this clear, we're not moving. These seats are ours, and our work, saving lives, is no less important than anyone else's comfort. The murmurs around the cabin grew louder. A young woman 2 rows back was typing furiously on her phone, her screen glowing with what looked like a social media post. Daniel's expression shifted again, this time to something closer to resignation. I'll inform the captain, he said before turning on his heel. Clara followed, leaving Elijah and Sophia to exchange a glance. Sophia sighed, leaning back in her seat. Well, so much for a peaceful flight. Elijah smiled, his hand reaching for hers once more. Peaceful or not, we've got each other. That's what matters. As the plane prepared for takeoff, neither of them realized that this small act of standing their ground would set off a chain of events that would ripple far beyond this flight. The unexpected attention. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Sophia tried to push the interaction with the flight attendants from her mind. She opened her tablet and pulled up the intricate 3D models she would use during her keynote presentation. With the immersive visuals of a pulsating heart valve, it was easy to lose herself in the material. Her passion for innovation always found a way to drown out distractions. But as she worked, she felt the weight of eyes on her. She looked up and saw the young woman 2 rows back still glancing in her direction, her fingers darting across her phone screen. Other passengers, too, seemed more alert, some openly staring, while others whispered behind raised hands. Elijah, Sophia murmured, nudging her husband. Elijah, who had been making notes on his tablet, followed her gaze. He turned back to her, raising an eyebrow. They're curious. Happens all the time. Don't let it bother you. Sophia sighed. It's not the curiosity. It's the judgment behind it. You know what they're thinking. Let them think what they want, Elijah said softly, his voice steady. We've got more important things to focus on. Sophia smiled faintly, appreciating his calm demeanor. It was one of the qualities that had drawn her to him all those years ago. But even as she turned back to her work, a part of her couldn't shake the unease growing in the cabin. An unlikely ally. 20 minutes into the flight, just as the attendants were beginning drink service, a voice broke the hum of the cabin. "Excuse me," a man said, his voice louder than necessary. Sophia looked up to see the businessman across the aisle. He was leaning forward in his seat, addressing the flight attendant serving drinks. His sharp suit and polished demeanor made him seem like someone used to being heard. "What exactly was that about earlier?" he asked, his tone laced with irritation. The attendant paused, clearly caught off guard. "I'm sorry, sir. Is there an issue with your service?" "No, the service is fine. But I couldn't help overhearing the conversation with that couple." He nodded toward Sophia and Elijah. "Why were they being asked to move? They seem perfectly seated to me." The flight attendant hesitated, her eyes flickering toward Clara, who was a few rows ahead. "It was a routine seating adjustment, sir. We were trying to accommodate a family in need." The businessman frowned. "Routine?" It didn't sound routine. It sounded like you were asking these doctors to give up their seats for someone else. "Is that common practice in first class?" The murmurs around the cabin grew louder. Sophia and Elijah exchanged a glance. They were used to handling these situations themselves, rarely did anyone else step in. The flight attendant faltered. "Sir, if you have concerns, you're welcome to address them with the cabin supervisor." "Oh, I intend to," the businessman said firmly. He glanced at Sophia and Elijah. "For what it's worth, I think it's ridiculous. You paid for these seats like anyone else. They should leave you alone." Sophia offered a polite smile. "Thank you. That means a lot." He waved her off. "Just doing what's right." The viral moment. A few rows back, the young woman with the phone had been typing furiously. She was now staring at the screen, her face a mix of excitement and determination. Moments later, she set her phone down and leaned toward her companion, whispering animatedly. Sophia didn't think much of it until her own phone vibrated. Curious, she glanced at the notification. It was from a social media platform she rarely used, but the headline caught her attention. "Doctors asked to give up first-class seats, stand their ground like pros." Sophia blinked, then nudged Elijah, showing him the screen. "What is this?" Elijah muttered, scrolling through the post. The article was brief but detailed, recounting the earlier exchange with surprising accuracy. It painted a vivid picture of the Carters' professionalism and the flight crew's questionable request. The post ended with a call to action, urging readers to respect the hard work and contributions of medical professionals. Sophia glanced back at the young woman, realizing she must have been the source. Their eyes met briefly, and the woman smiled sheepishly before turning back to her phone. "What do you want to do?" Elijah asked, his voice low. Sophia sighed. "Nothing. It's out there now. Let's just focus on Zurich." Elijah nodded, but as the minutes passed, more notifications started pouring in. The story was gaining traction fast. Confrontation at 30,000 feet. Halfway through the flight, Daniels returned to their row. His expression was tight, his usual composure slightly cracked. "Doctor and Dr. Carter," he began, his voice clipped. "I understand there's been some misunderstanding earlier. I want to assure you that your seats are secure, and there will be no further requests for you to move." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding? It seemed pretty clear earlier." Daniels hesitated. "We didn't mean to cause any inconvenience. We value all of our passengers, especially esteemed professionals like yourselves." Elijah leaned back in his seat, his expression calm but sharp. "What changed? The story going viral?" Daniels stiffened but didn't respond directly. "We just wanted to ensure you're comfortable for the remainder of the flight." Sophia met his gaze. "We're fine, Mr. Daniels." "Thank you." As Daniels walked away, Elijah shook his head. "Damage control. That's all this is." Sophia shrugged. Let them spin it however they want. We know the truth. A ripple effect. By the time the plane landed in Zurich, the Carters' phones were buzzing with messages. Friends, colleagues, and even patients had reached out, some expressing outrage on their behalf, others offering words of support. But what surprised them most was the impact the story had on a larger scale. The next day, as they arrived at the conference, several attendees approached them, mentioning the article. A journalist from a prominent medical magazine even asked for an interview, eager to tie the incident to broader conversations about bias and respect for professionals in underrepresented groups. Sophia and Elijah hadn't expected any of this. They had simply stood their ground, as they had countless times before. But this time, their quiet defiance had sparked something bigger, a conversation they hoped would lead to change. As they walked into the conference hall, hand in hand, Sophia smiled at Elijah. Well, looks like our story made it here before we did. Elijah chuckled. Let's make sure the work we're presenting speaks even louder. And with that, they stepped into the spotlight, ready to inspire and educate, not just as surgeons, but as symbols of perseverance and dignity. The conference spotlight. The morning sun spilled through the glass-paneled ceiling of Zurich's prestigious International Medical Convention Center, bathing the expansive lobby in a golden glow. Surgeons, researchers, and medical innovators from across the globe moved through the space, their voices a lively hum of excitement. Dr. Sophia Carter and Dr. Elijah Carter had attended conferences like this many times before, but this one felt different. The viral story from the flight had spread like wildfire, casting an unanticipated spotlight on their arrival. As they entered the lobby, they were met with an undercurrent of recognition, glances, nods, and murmurs as attendees connected their faces to the news circulating online. I thought we'd left the flight drama behind us, Elijah said under his breath, leaning toward Sophia as they approached the registration desk. Sophia smiled faintly. Looks like it followed us. She adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase, glancing around the room. Let's just focus on why we're here. The work speaks for itself. But even as she said it, a tall man in a sharp gray suit approached, his badge identifying him as Dr. Anton Weiss, one of the keynote organizers. Dr. Carter. Dr. Carter. Weiss greeted them with an enthusiastic handshake, first Sophia, then Elijah. It's an honor to have you here. Your papers have generated quite a buzz. We're honored to present, Sophia replied warmly, though Weiss's expression hinted at more. Your keynote address is highly anticipated, of course, Weiss said, motioning for them to follow him toward the main hall. But I must say, the circumstances surrounding your flight here have sparked additional conversations. It's rare to see surgeons making headlines outside the medical field. Elijah chuckled softly. We'd prefer to keep the attention on our research, Dr. Weiss. The work is what matters. Of course, Weiss agreed quickly. But you've also inadvertently highlighted an important issue. Many of us have faced moments like those, though not everyone handles them with such grace. Sophia glanced at Elijah, their unspoken understanding clear. This was an opportunity they hadn't planned for, but might as well use. The keynote speech. The cavernous auditorium buzzed with anticipation as the audience settled in for Sophia's keynote address. The large stage, flanked by towering digital screens, was already lit, the title of her presentation displayed prominently. Revolutionizing Aortic Valve Surgery, A Path to Safer, Faster Recovery. Sophia stepped onto the stage, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. A hush fell over the room as she adjusted the microphone and took a steadying breath. Public speaking had never been her favorite part of the job, but the importance of the message always carried her through. Good morning, she began, her voice strong but calm. It's an honor to be here with so many brilliant minds dedicated to advancing medicine. Today, I want to share with you not just a technique but a vision, one where innovation meets compassion, and where surgical advancements improve not just patient outcomes but their quality of life. As she spoke, the digital screens behind her came alive with intricate 3D animations of the human heart. Sophia described her team's groundbreaking technique for aortic valve replacement, detailing how it reduced the need for invasive procedures and cut recovery times significantly. The audience was captivated. Many leaned forward in their seats, taking notes or snapping pictures of the slides. But Sophia didn't just focus on the technical details. She wove in stories of patients, elderly individuals who had returned to gardening within weeks, young parents who could once again play with their children. "Science isn't just about what we can do," she said, her voice resonating through the hall. "It's about why we do it. Every valve replaced, every life extended, is a testament to what we can achieve when we push the boundaries of what's possible." The audience erupted into applause as she concluded, some standing in appreciation. Sophia allowed herself a small smile, glancing toward Elijah, who stood backstage, watching with pride. Elijah's turn. Later that afternoon, it was Elijah's turn to take the stage. His presentation focused on a revolutionary monitoring system for post-operative cardiac patients. The technology used AI to predict complications before they occurred, potentially saving countless lives. As he began, Elijah exuded his characteristic calm confidence. His voice was steady, his explanations clear and compelling. But halfway through his talk, he paused, glancing up at the audience. "I'd like to take a moment to address something unrelated to my presentation," he said, his tone serious but warm. The audience stirred, curious. "Many of you have probably heard about the incident on our flight here," Elijah continued. "It's not the first time my wife and I have been asked to justify our place in spaces we've worked tirelessly to reach. Unfortunately, it likely won't be the last." Sophia, seated in the front row, tensed slightly. Elijah hadn't mentioned he was planning to address the situation publicly. "But here's the thing," he said, his gaze sweeping the room. "We all have moments when our worth is questioned, when we're asked, either directly or indirectly, 'Do you belong here?' And the answer, every time, must be an unwavering yes." The room was silent, his words sinking in. "Our work, our dedication, our commitment to saving lives, that's what defines us. Not someone else's assumptions or biases." He smiled slightly. "And if there's one thing my wife and I hope to leave you with, beyond our research, it's this: never let anyone make you doubt your place in the world. Own your achievements. You've earned them." The audience erupted into applause, louder and longer than before. Elijah nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting in a quiet smile, and continued with his presentation. A shift in perspective. By the end of the conference, the Carters were more than just celebrated researchers, they had become symbols of resilience and excellence. Colleagues approached them to express admiration not just for their work, but for the dignity with which they carried themselves. One young surgeon, a woman in her early 30s, stopped them as they exited a panel discussion. Dr. Carter, she began nervously, clutching a program booklet. "I just wanted to say, thank you. I've looked up to both of you for years, but seeing how you handled everything this week, it's inspired me more than you can imagine." Sophia placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. "Thank you for saying that. But remember, you have the power to inspire, too. Keep pushing forward. The world needs your voice." The woman nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. The journey home. On the flight back to the States, the Carters found themselves once again seated in first class. This time, there were no interruptions, no questioning of their place. As the plane ascended, Sophia leaned back in her seat, glancing at Elijah. "You realize we've become accidental activists now?" Elijah chuckled. "Not exactly what I signed up for, but if it opens doors for others, I'm all for it." Sophia smiled, reaching for his hand. "Me too. But for now, let's enjoy the quiet. We've earned it." As the clouds stretched out beneath them, the Carters closed their eyes, finally allowing themselves a moment of peace. They were ready to continue breaking barriers, but for now, they simply reveled in the knowledge that they had made a difference, in the operating room, at the conference, and perhaps even beyond. A legacy beyond the operating room. As the wheels of the plane touched down on American soil, Dr. Sophia Carter and Dr. Elijah Carter braced themselves for the next chapter of their journey. The conference in Zurich had cemented their professional reputations, but the unexpected viral moment from their flight had turned their lives into a spotlighted narrative of resilience and success. They had barely left the arrival's gate when they were met by a small crowd of reporters and supporters holding signs with phrases like "breaking barriers," "saving lives," and "representation matters." Sophia hesitated, her hand instinctively tightening around the strap of her bag. Elijah placed a steadying hand on the small of her back, offering silent reassurance. "You ready for this?" he asked, his voice low and calm. "Ready or not," Sophia replied with a faint smile. "Let's face it together." They walked forward, greeted by a flurry of camera flashes and questions. The media storm. Over the next few weeks, the Carter story continued to dominate headlines. Every major news outlet wanted to interview the couple, not just for their professional achievements, but for their personal experiences as trailblazers in medicine. Sophia sat across from a journalist in the living room of their modest but elegant home. The journalist, a woman in her early 40s, adjusted her glasses as she reviewed her notes. "Dr. Carter, you and your husband have become symbols of excellence in your field, but also of perseverance in the face of bias. How do you feel about this dual role?" Sophia considered the question carefully. "It's an honor, of course," she began, "but it's also a responsibility. Elijah and I didn't set out to be symbols. We just wanted to be good doctors, great doctors, even. But if our story inspires others, if it makes someone feel like they belong in spaces they've worked hard for, then it's worth it." The journalist nodded. "Many people, especially young professionals of color, have said they see themselves in you. Does that add pressure to your work?" Elijah, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped in to answer. "It's not pressure," he said, sitting beside Sophia. "It's motivation. We've had mentors who paved the way for us, and now it's our turn to pay it forward. Whether it's through teaching, mentoring, or just showing up and being visible, we want to make sure the next generation has fewer obstacles to face." Mentorship and advocacy. The Carters decided to turn their newfound visibility into action. They launched the Carter Foundation for Medical Equity, a nonprofit aimed at providing mentorship, scholarships, and resources for underrepresented groups in medicine. Their first initiative was a mentorship program, pairing high school and college students interested in healthcare with professionals across various specialties. They also established a scholarship fund to help cover the costs of medical school for students from underserved communities. At the foundation's launch event, held in a packed auditorium, Sophia addressed the crowd. "When I was a little girl," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "I didn't see many people who looked like me in white coats. It wasn't until I met my first mentor, a Black woman surgeon, that I truly believed I could be one too. Representation matters. Visibility matters. That's why we're here today." The audience erupted into applause. Many attendees, from aspiring doctors to seasoned professionals, felt a renewed sense of purpose in their work. Back in the operating room. Despite their growing public profile, the Carters never wavered in their dedication to their patients. Both continued to perform surgeries and lead research projects at their hospital. One morning, as Sophia scrubbed in for a complex valve replacement surgery, a young surgical resident approached her. "Dr. Carter," the resident began nervously, "I just wanted to say thank you. I'm here because of you and Dr. Carter. Your story made me believe I could make it." Sophia paused, meeting the resident's eyes. "You don't have to thank me," she said gently. "You're here because of your hard work and talent. Never forget that." The resident nodded, her confidence visibly growing. Sophia smiled under her mask as she turned toward the operating table. Moments like these reminded her why she had chosen this path, despite its challenges. A meeting with the airline. Months after the infamous flight, the Carters received an unexpected invitation from the airline's CEO. Curious, they accepted. The meeting, held in a sleek boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows, began with an apology. We want to express our deepest regret for how you were treated, the CEO said, his tone earnest. Your experience has highlighted systemic issues within our policies, and we're committed to making changes. Sophia and Elijah exchanged a glance. And what changes are you implementing? Elijah asked, his voice measured but firm. The CEO outlined several initiatives, including diversity training for employees, revised seating policies to prevent overbooking conflicts, and a partnership with organizations promoting equity and inclusion. We'd also like to make a donation to your foundation, the CEO added, as a gesture of our commitment to improving. Sophia leaned forward, her gaze steady. Change isn't just about gestures, she said. It's about action. We'll accept your donation, but we'll also be watching to see if your policies truly evolve. The CEO nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Global recognition. The Carters' impact continued to grow, earning them invitations to speak at universities, conferences, and even the United Nations on the intersections of medicine, equity, and representation. One particularly memorable moment came when they were invited to deliver a joint commencement address at their alma mater. Standing before a sea of graduates in their caps and gowns, Elijah spoke first. Dream big, he said, his voice resonating across the auditorium. But remember, dreams don't work without dedication. Whatever field you enter, strive to leave it better than you found it. Sophia followed, her voice filled with emotion. And never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. You belong wherever your hard work, passion, and integrity take you. Own your space. You've earned it. The crowd erupted into applause, many students visibly moved by their words.